All right, welcome back, everybody. Today we are going to be talking about different elements of a map and how to read the map. The three big things we're going to cover today are the definitions of globes versus the definition of maps, because they are two different things. And then we're going to take a bit of a deep dive into map elements. I am going to let you guys know that reading a map can seem confusing, especially at first, but once you break it down, it makes a lot more sense. We are also going to spend at least another day, if not two, on different map elements to help you guys really learn and remember them. So don't worry if you're still confusing some of them after today. That's totally normal. So the first thing that we want to do is differentiate between globes and maps. Globes are three-dimensional representations of Earth. They are really useful to see Earth as a whole, but they are not useful to see a small section of Earth. Usually globes show things really zoomed out, and so it's really hard to see specific lines of some countries if they're smaller or states, and seeing cities on them is really, really difficult. On the other hand, a map is a two-dimensional representation of Earth. Now, whereas a globe, you usually see the whole Earth. There isn't like a section globe or like a half globe or anything like that commonly seen. Maps can show any size area of Earth. So it's flat, it's two-dimensional, and with that comes some other issues like trying to make a three-dimensional object like the Earth appear two-dimensional. But overall, maps are really helpful in looking at specific smaller areas and looking at more detailed descriptions of Earth. Now, this is where I was saying earlier, do not worry if some of these seem a little bit confusing, or if I go a little bit quicker on these. We are going to spend a couple of days looking at the different map and globe elements, so don't worry about it. There are 10 in all that we're going to look at. We're going to look at a lot of them. We're going to look at them a few different times, so you will understand them and remember them by the end. Don't worry about today. It's more of an introduction. The first element that we're going to look at is the title. So this is the subject or the map or globe. It's usually found at the top, usually in bigger font. And I think it's one of the easier things to remember because we see titles on lots of things. The second one you'll see there are symbols. So they represent information such as natural resources and economic activities. These might be things like if you see a square for a capital city versus a circle for just a normal city in a state. The next one there is labels. These are names of places like cities, countries, rivers, and mountains, usually in a smaller font, usually not bolded, so you can tell between a label and a title. Then the last on this slide are colors. Colors can be really useful to represent different kinds of information. So while sometimes colors are just to make maps look pretty, sometimes colors can show different things, like blue can be a lake or a river, or maybe we're looking at how many people live in an area. And so different colors mean different number of people live in that area. Looking at these next few terms, this top one, number 5, is lines of latitude. Latitude are horizontal. They stretch um, across the map horizontally, and they measure north and south of the equator. The opposites, or kind of the other side, are long lines of longitude. These are long lines that run vertically, and they measure the distance east and west of the prime meridian. So the equator and prime meridian are two terms that we are going to be looking at more a little bit later in this video. Then the last term on this slide is scale. So a scale on a map shows how much distance on Earth is represented by a distance on a map or a globe. So we know that a map or a globe is not drawn to scale, because then it would be as big as whatever it's showing. So instead, they might say 1 inch is 1 mile. So if you measure 5 inches on the map, that might be 5 miles in real life. Sometimes then you get to things like a map of the solar system, and an inch might be I don't even know, 500 miles or something. So that's why it's important to look at a scale so you can kind of start to see how much space is actually between two things in real life. All right, the last three map elements that we're looking at today, that number 8 is a legend. This is the key, the map key. We're going to start calling it a legend now, but just know that a map or a legend and a key are kind of the same thing. The legend tells what the symbols and colors on the map or globe represent. So earlier I was saying how maybe you have a map that shows how many people live in a certain area. Maybe pink is used when you have over 10,000 people living in an area, whereas blue is where you have 1,000 people living in an area. So those types of things you can see by looking at the legend. Number 9 is the compass rose. A lot of the time people just refer to this as a compass, which is an okay way to shorten it. Just know that a compass and a compass rose are the same thing. These show the directions. The four main directions are north, south, east, and west. And then you can get into the secondary directions of north, east, northwest, southeast, and southwest. And then the last one there, number 10, is the locator globe. This is a little picture that you see on a map that shows the area of the world shown on a map. So for example, if I was looking at a map of Missouri, the locator globe might have a picture of the whole United States, and then it would have a little box over where Missouri is to kind of show that that's where we're looking. All right, the last chunk of today's lecture looks a little bit more at those lines of latitude and lines of longitude that I mentioned. So we said before that lines of latitude are imaginary horizontal lines that measure the distance north and south of the equator. So lines of latitude run east to west, sideways, horizontally across the earth. And they measure the distance north and south of the equator. So that equator is that center line of latitude. We hear a lot about the equator, especially when we talk about like rainforests, because the equator is the centermost point of Earth looking at it horizontally. So that's where the sunlight hits most directly most of the year. So that's where we hear a lot about like saving the rainforests and things, because it's around the equator, which is the center line of latitude. And then the flip side of the line of latitude is the lines of longitude. So lines of longitude are long, they stretch long across the earth. They are imaginary vertical lines that measure the distance east and west of the prime meridian. We don't talk about the prime meridian as much, but it is important to know that that is the center line of longitude. So if you hear prime meridian, longitude, equator, latitude, prime meridian, longitude. And then it's important to know about the equator and the prime meridian because from those we learn about hemispheres. So hemisphere is half of Earth. And it's important to know about hemispheres because we can learn a lot about things like weather patterns from looking at hemispheres. So like I said, hemisphere is half of Earth. The equator divides the northern hemisphere from the southern hemisphere. And the prime meridian divides the eastern hemisphere from the western hemisphere. All right, so to wrap up the video for today, I really want you guys to remember that a globe is good to see a 3D version of the Earth, and a map is used to see a 2D version of the Earth. And the other things I want you to remember are that lines of latitude run east to west, they run horizontally, and lines of longitude run north to south vertically. Again, do not freak out about all of those terms on the map elements. We are going to go over those. We're going to practice those. You will be okay with them. Go ahead and check in Canvas and see what your next job is. Bye.